Friends, we are going to discuss Aristotle, perhaps the most important philosopher in the Western aesthetics and the pupil of Plato. In the previous session, we tried to understand Plato's grievances about art, and we also discussed that Aristotle has tried to defend the artist community in his argument. Aristotle's Poetics is considered to be a core compendium for his thought in aesthetics, but the theory for which he is known, catharsis, is not fully discussed in Poetics, and that is why it is open for discussion. There are so many different scholars who have opined on the theory of catharsis, but we will talk about catharsis at a later juncture. Before that, we will try to go back to the accusations of Plato and Aristotle's answer to those accusations. To refresh the things which we discussed in the previous session, we saw that Plato is of the opinion that an artist is a hapless imitator of the real world, because he imitates the imitation. His imitation is twice removed from reality, and that is why, and then you remember we talked about the final cause, the formal cause, the material cause, and the efficient cause in the same context. Now Aristotle uses the same argument to interpret it differently. Aristotle has a very interesting observation to make. He says that the final cause is the idea, the formal cause is the form, the material cause is the matter which is used for it, and the efficient cause is the person who makes the pot. In this case, he is an artist. Now the question is, when we are talking about this causality, these four causes, the most important thing is it possible in reality to separate the formal cause from the material cause? When we are talking about material, everything is made up of material. Without matter, things do not exist. So when we talk about any material, can you think of that material without thinking of its form? When you say steel, can you imagine steel without any form? We will think about steel bars, we will think about steel rods, we will think about steel objects, but you cannot think about steel without any shape or any form. The vice versa is also equally true. If you try to point out any form, is it practically possible to identify that form without the reference of a material? When I say chair, can you imagine a chair without any matter? Is it possible to imagine a chair which is made up of nothing? The moment I say chair, probably some of you might think about a wooden chair. The other person might think about a steel chair. The third one might think about a sofa. But the material is there, which simply means that the material cause and the formal cause are inseparable from each other. You cannot separate them. It is naturally they are connected together. Material and form. There is no material without form, and there is no form without material. If this is true, I think it is a very logical argument. If this is true, when you make a drawing, the material, when Plato said that artist is imitating the nature. Now the object which is made in the nature, when you make a drawing of a chair, now what material is that? The original chair is a steel chair, or the original chair is a wooden chair. The chair which was drawn on the paper by the artist is not in wood, is not in steel, which means that the artist has successfully separated the form from the material. What he has imitated is only the form. What he has created is only the form. The material is left behind, which means that he is doing something which is not possible for the nature. What nature cannot do, nature cannot separate form and material from each other. But the artist can. The artist separated the form and the nature. He only took out the form. When he draws a horse, the form of the horse is there, but the material of the horse is not there. The real horse is not there. When he draws a chair, the chair is there, but the material of the chair is not there. He is doing something which is totally impossible in nature, which is never seen in nature. If this is true, how can you call it imitation? Aristotle poses a question that the artist is creating something original which the nature cannot create, and you are calling him an imitator. Artist is not an imitator. Artist is a creator. He creates things which exist in the nature, but he recreates them in under different circumstances. He creates a new reality under different circumstances. The original reality is there, but he creates a parallel reality. So it is almost like the story of Vishwamitra. You know that Vishwamitra created a new world. Vishwamitra created a parallel world. So the artist is creating a parallel world. One can extend this argument to other arts also. In theatre, the dramatist is creating a new world. He is certainly borrowing things from the actual world, but he does not imitate them. It is a new creation. Perhaps Bharata is also trying to tell us the same thing. If you remember our discussion on Bharata Muni, Bharata did not say Natyam Bhavanukaranam. He said Bhavanukirtanam. Aristotle is trying to tell us the same thing, that a work of art is a recreation under different circumstances. Indian poetics has tried to say the same thing in a shloka which says Apare Kavya Samsare Kavireka Prajapati Yadyat Grayate Vishwam Tadaiva Parikirtat. In the world of poems or in the world of art, the creator is the artist himself. Kavireka Prajapati, वो प्रजापति है. उसे जैसे दुनिया पसंद आएगी, the way he likes the world, he creates it. He is not accepting the world as it has been given to him. He recreates the world to his choice. He is a creator and not merely a hapless imitator, as Plato says. And this is the defense which has been given by Aristotle to the theory of mimesis. But this is not Aristotle's only contribution to art. This is just a defense which he gave against his own teacher. But what he proposed as his own theory is a very interesting theory which is based on the Greek tragedies. Like Bharata, Aristotle also mainly bases his theory on theatre, but it is applicable to other arts also. So there also you will find some similarity between Bharata and Aristotle. If you remember, while talking about Bharata, we brought in Aristotle and noticed some similarities between Bharata's theory and Aristotelian theory. And the most important similarity between these two scholars is their theories are based on the expression of emotions. But again, there is a lot of difference. We'll try to understand the difference. At this period, when Aristotle was active, I told you that every theory has a social context. Every theory has a social relevance. And probably because this was the period of epidemics in Greece. Very severe epidemics were going on and quite a few people died in Greece at that time. That could be the reason why the reflection of that tragedy is found in Greek literature and Greek theatre also. There are three great writers which we come across in Greece at this period. One is Aeschylus, the other is Euripides, and the third, perhaps the greatest of them, is Sophocles. Aristotle greatly admires all of them, and when he talks about the theory of catharsis, you somewhere keep realizing that he is relying a lot on these tragedies. He discusses tragedies in great details and finally concludes observations into his theory of catharsis. Now, what exactly is a tragedy? And why do we enjoy looking at tragedies? Like tragedy, in Indian languages, we call it Shokantika, where there are miseries, where there is sorrow. Now, why people spend from their pocket to go and watch other people's sorrow? To go and see people suffering, see people undergoing such troubles. Isn't it a little a pervert that I'm enjoying somebody's sorrow, I'm enjoying somebody's sufferings? But do I really enjoy them? What exactly? Why do you want to watch those tragedies? I don't think you go and just feel happy that the person on the other side of there is a very interesting phenomenon which is known as the proscenic barrier. Proscenic barrier is the barrier between the proscenium and the auditorium. Actually, when we sit in the auditorium, there is nothing in between the people on the stage and the people in the auditorium. There is no barrier in between, but there is an unseen barrier. Because the world on the other side of the barrier is a different world. It is a different period. Suppose if you are watching Ramayana, then the people on the stage are in that period and I am in 20th century. So I can afford to be in 20th century and peep into a period which is several thousand years old. Because of that proscenic barrier, that proscenium separates me in every respect from the people on the stage. They are in a different period, they are in a different situation. So do we see tragedies just to feel happy that man over there is facing all the problems? I am sitting here comfortably eating my popcorn and enjoying it. I don't think we are so pervert just to go and sit there comfortably enjoying your food and watching their tragedies. There must be some reason behind it. Yes, that sense of security might be there, because whenever, even this has been observed by the scholars also, that whenever you give alms to people, whenever you give, if a beggar comes to you and if you give some alms to him, somewhere you have a feeling that you are not in that position. You are in a happier position, you are in a privileged position, you can give something to him. You are privileged, he is not. This kind of feeling could be there. We cannot totally deny it. But at the same time, there is a feeling of empathy also. So what is this empathy? How does it come? And in what cases this empathy comes? There are several beggars who come to you. You chase away some of them and you respond to some of them. एक को पैसा दोगे, दूसरे को हकाल दोगे. There must be some reason behind it. Similarly, when we talk about the tragedies, there are several possibilities of sad situation. Which can be a sad situation? A good man, a great man, a thoroughly nice man facing problems and entering into a sorrowful situation. This could be one possibility. The other possibility is a bad man. He faces a sad situation. The third possibility is a bad man is getting all the happinesses and getting all the pleasures of the world. And the fourth situation is an ordinary man, not a great man, not a good man. He is a man who has some good qualities, some bad qualities. He is a man like you and me, who has weaknesses, who has some good intentions, some bad intentions, and because of some wrong decisions, he is pushed into a tragic situation. Now, which of these four will create an empathy in your mind? The first one, where the great man or the saintly man is pushed into a sorrowful situation, you will feel irritated. You will not feel sad. You will feel dejected कि ये क्या है, मतलब इतना अच्छा आदमी और उसको ऐसे भुगतना पड़ रहा है. नहीं? When Vishwamitra asked Harishchandra to give him the kingdom, and then Harishchandra faced all the tragedy, at that juncture you feel irritated, you feel angry with Vishwamitra कि ये कर क्या रहा है, why is it troubling? That's not a tragedy. There, the outcome of such a situation is anger, dejection. That is not a tragic situation. Or when a bad man gets all the pleasures of the life, there also you feel dejection. कि दुनिया में कोई justice नाम की चीज ही नहीं है. हम कहते हैं ना कि such a man who deserves to go to hell, he is getting all the happiness. So that is also not a tragic situation. A bad man facing sorrowful situation or tragic situation is also not a tragic situation, because there you may not feel empathetic to him. Rather you will feel कि ठीक है, that's what he deserved. He has done all bad things all his life. Now if he faces tragedies, he has asked for it. He deserved it. He called for it. अब ठीक है, मरे, अपने नसीब से मर रहा है. But the fourth situation, a simple man who makes a mistake in his life, and then for that small mistake he faces such a tragedy, that at that juncture you really feel empathetic to him. You start feeling that he didn't deserve it. बेचारे के नसीब में कैसी चीजें आ गई, इसने ऐसे क्या किया था बेचारे ने, इतनी से तो उसकी मिस्टेक थी, उसके लिए उसको क्या क्या भुगतना पड़ रहा है. दिस इज अ ट्रेजिक सिचुएशन. Here you can be empathetic to him. These situations have been exploited by some of the playwrights in Greek literature, and one of them, yesterday I mentioned it in some other context, but if you remember, I talked about a tragedy called Oedipus Rex. Oedipus Rex. Rex means king. Actually, in Greek it is spelled as Oedipus. In English they call it Oedipus. Now this Oedipus, when he was born, his father saw a dream that his wife, that is Oedipus's mother, gave birth to a burning torch. Mashal. And that torch set fire to the kingdom of his father. Naturally, the father was worried. He called the soothsayer and asked him that what exactly is the meaning of this dream. The soothsayer said that the son who is born now is going to destroy your kingdom and he is going to marry your wife. So he said, how can it happen? He said, yes, it will happen. And then the king decides to kill the child. He hands over that child to some guards and tells them to take him to the jungle and kill him. They take him there, but it's a newborn child. The guards are also, they can't kill him. They just leave the child over there and they kill a rabbit and soak the clothes of that child in the blood of that rabbit and bring them home. They say they have killed it. Now the neighboring king who doesn't have a child, he comes over there at night. He listens to the crying of that child and he comes over there. Since he doesn't have a child, he takes away the child and looks after him. The child grows up. He grows up into a very powerful king, though a small king compared to the one to his father. But then he is a very ambitious king and he starts conquering the kingdoms along which are all the neighboring kingdoms. And in the process, he finally conquers his father's kingdom also, kills his father, and according to the convention of those days, that the kings used to marry all the queens. Defeated king, he married all the queens, and his mother was also one of them. And then after, when he came to know about it, after having a child, when he came to know about it, he comes to know about it that his wife is his mother. Now this is how tragic, how horribly tragic. Now a tragedy is not merely a sad story. If you read Devdas, at the end of Devdas, Sharat Chandra has written a small comment which is very interesting. Rather we ignore that, and that is why a person like Devdas is always inoculation. The serum which is injected in your body is a weak this thing of the same virus. The virus of cholera is collected. Actually, the virus of cholera is injected in the body of a horse. Now, horse is very strong. The horse doesn't get cholera. But the virus lives over there. Then that virus is taken away from the horse's body because horse has already made them weak. Then that weak virus is injected into your body. Now, this weak virus, when it comes to my body, my white blood corpuscles, my white blood cells, who are supposed to fight the virus, they get a training. It is like the military training. In military training, you have mock wars. असली दुश्मन सामने नहीं होता है, उस दुश्मन के बदले में वहाँ पे दुश्मन का पुतला लगाया है. Similarly, this weak virus, when it enters into the body, this WBC, they come and fight with them and they get the training to fight the cholera virus. Then when the actual cholera virus comes, they can successfully overcome them. Now, this is what is happening in the theatre, according to some scholars, that when you see a tragic situation on the proscenium, you come to know that how one is supposed to face it. This is almost like a cholera inoculation, that it is a training for the audience to know how to face tragic situations. Now, this sounds a little too pedantic. That you are being given training to face tragedies. I sincerely wonder whether Aristotle had this in mind, but this too is one of the interpretations of catharsis, that you get a kind of emotional preparedness to face the tragedies. But the third interpretation, which is more interesting, and I think that is the most convincing interpretation, and probably considering Aristotle's intellectual and ethical status, that sounds most convincing. Sympathy is different and empathy is different. In sympathy, you are on a podium, you are on a pedestal, and you are looking down the person to whom you are feeling sympathetic to. Actually, कि जिसके साथ सहानुभूति दिखा रहे हो वो तो तुमसे नीचे, there is a sense of ego boosting in sympathy. Empathy is sharing the emotions. You are sharing the emotions on the same level. When you see a play, when you see the person suffering over there, you almost share his emotions. All the emotions, all the troubles which the person is undergoing, you share those emotions with him or her, don't you? Otherwise you will not enjoy that film at all. You perhaps laugh at him. Many times it happens that if it is a badly made film or badly made play, or badly made TV serial, even however tragic it might be, people keep laughing at it. They can't empathize with that sorrow because it is not very convincing. But if it is convincingly put, you feel empathetic to that person. And isn't it very interesting that you as an individual are feeling empathetic to him? The person sitting next to him, you don't know him. The person sitting next to him, you don't know his name, you don't know where he stays, you don't know what he does. But he too is undergoing the same experience, isn't he? So you are feeling one with the play. He is feeling one with the play. The third one is feeling one with the play. The fourth one is playing. The 1,000 people sitting in the auditorium, all of them are relating their emotions with the emotions of the protagonist on the proscenium. It is almost like a bicycle wheel, where the central hub is connected to so many points on the rim. So this is a central work of art, that single work of art is connected to so many people emotionally, and all of them are feeling empathetic to it. So in a way, I am sharing the same feeling with the protagonist, and I am sharing the same feeling with the person sitting next to me. So I am developing a kind of brotherhood. All the 1,000 people there are in a same mood over there. We are like brothers. We are sharing the same thing. We are empathizing with each other. This is universal. The universal brotherhood is not the word that Aristotle has used. It is used later on by Tolstoy. But I am using it. That it is like universal brotherhood, that all those people are sharing the same feeling and feeling one with the protagonist on the rim. Isn't it a great feeling? This is universalization. It becomes a universal feeling. The sorrow of that single man becomes the sorrow of the whole crowd, and it becomes a universal sorrow. All of us share it and all of us fight it. We become one with that. This could be catharsis. There is one more possibility also, that under this process, under process of universalization, it is quite possible that when you see this man suffering, Oedipus suffering, now when you see his tragedy, you have so many tragic events in your life also. Each of us have. Is there any person who doesn't have sorrow in his life? Everybody has it. But the moment you see that sorrow on such a large scale, you feel that my sorrow is nothing. This is sorrow. मेरा दुख तो क्या है? कुछ नहीं है इसके सामने. And you get an assurance that ठीक है, ये तो आता रहता है. This is tragedy. And if this is tragedy, rather I should feel happy that my sorrow is nothing in front of this. When you read Mahabharata and read about Ashwatthama, that poor chap with that bleeding wound on his forehead is undergoing pain all the time, and this is how it has been portrayed. He is a Chiranjeevi, he cannot die. They say that you can meet Ashwatthama even today on the banks of Narmada. Forget about the mythical part of it. But if you try to take it as a work of art, now imagine a person who is suffering all this misery and all this pain doesn't even have the privilege of death. He cannot die. He is not allowed to die. Now, isn't it a shocking tragedy? Actually frightens me, it tremors me. Now, when I think about the tragedy of Ashwatthama, and when I think about my problems in the faculty and my problem, I feel that are there problems? Nothing. That gives me tremendous strength. I realize that my problems are not problems at all. My problems, this is a problem, this is tragedy. And that gives me tremendous strength. It gives me tremendous confidence. So that is why it works like that cholera inoculation. It gives you a kind of a feeling of universal brotherhood. It gives you tremendous strength. It makes you a better human being. And that is why when Plato asked whether art gives courage to society, whether art gives knowledge to society, whether art makes an individual a better individual, and his answer was no. Aristotle could confidently say that yes, art can give knowledge to society, art can give courage to society, it can make a person, a better citizen. This is the reason which he had. Today, if somebody raises these questions, probably we will say that these questions are irrelevant. It is not art's job to make good persons. It is not art's job to give you knowledge or courage. Art has nothing to do with knowledge. But this is the today's position. In Greco-Romans time, when art was enjoying a different status, and when people like Plato had so many expectations from art, I think this answer was a very, very relevant answer. Aristotle in Catharsis has raised so many controversies. There are so many scholars like Collingwood, Boucher, Beardsley who have commented on Aristotle's theory of catharsis. Each of them has a different interpretation of it, but that is the beauty of that theory, that even today the theory of catharsis is still on the anvil, it is being discussed. And that is why Aristotle, according to some of the scholars, is the fountainhead of aesthetic thinking in the West. The aesthetic thinking starts from Aristotle and not Plato, according to some of the scholars. Keeping aside that controversy, we can certainly say that Aristotle gave so many different possibilities. He suggested so many different possibilities of aesthetic thinking through his theories and arguments. Aristotle himself defines tragedy as a tragedy then is the imitation of an action that is serious, has magnitude, and is complete in itself, in language with pleasurable accessories, each kind brought in separately in the various parts of the work, in a dramatic, not in a narrative form, with incidents arousing pity and fear, wherewith to accomplish its catharsis of such emotions.